Welcome to Tuesday Newsday, your #1 resource for the entire week's worth of VR news. A lot has happened the past few weeks. We got a ton of stuff from Meta, some of it good, some of it incredibly alarming. We got fresh details on Valve's next headset, and a couple of absolutely insane news bits that I think you're gonna really like. From VR headsets entering prisons, to the original founder of Oculus making a huge comeback in the XR industry. Yeah, this is gonna be a fun one. But before we get to all this, a word from this video sponsor, SIDEQUEST. As one of the largest VR app platforms in existence with thousands of VR games and apps to explore, SIDEQUEST is just a great tool to have, especially if you're a Quest user. And SIDEQUEST has been working on their own social VR platform for the past few years, Banter. And I think you can see exactly what Banter is all about via their new trailer.
Become the self-deluded rock star you've always wanted to be. Or push your tush, or whatever you wish to push, and if nothing strikes your fancy, then build your own. Build a space where none of the stairs make sense. Or, frankly, make an obstacle course where you get flung out of a snowman's Banter is where you can do anything, or become anything you want. Play Banter now.
Alright, SideQuest over. We've got a lot to cover, so let's just get right into the news. Just a couple months ago, it made news that a Florida judge had used a Quest 2 in the middle of a court trial to experience a crime in first person in VR, which is basically just a courtroom brain dance if you think about it. But this was kind of a big deal, as this was essentially the first time in history that a virtual reality experience was used as evidence in trial. But this isn't the only way that VR has made its way into the United States justice system. Multiple California prisons have begun instating a VR program that is specifically designed for inmates that are currently in solitary confinement, or stuck in small cages that are actually called, quote, therapeutic modules, where they were sent because of misbehavior within the prison. While in solitary confinement, inmates are subjected to an intensive 7-day VR program where they basically live through a variety of real-life scenarios, ranging from everyday life scenes to art and poetry to uncomfortable situations like physically running into someone on the street and having to deal with the altercation. Creative Acts, the company that creates the so-called programming that the inmates go through, states that the usage of VR allows inmates to experience culture and situations in a way that they wouldn't normally be able to. But almost more importantly, it gets the inmates out of the prison environment, even if just for a moment. And I'm not gonna lie, without any context, there is something deeply unsettling about these pictures. It looks dystopian to say the least, and I think there's even something further unsettling about the base idea of prisoners using virtual reality as a form of escapism while being locked up. It's reminiscent of a Matrix scene, getting lost in a virtual world while being physically confined. But in reality, at least in this specific scenario, when given proper context, the results are a bit more complicated. Because, well, this VR therapy for inmates has actually been working really, really well. Like, shockingly well. According to The Guardian, prisons that have piloted the programming reported a, wait for it, 96% reduction in infractions from participants. And for example, after 1 week of the program, average infractions fell from 735 to 1. In one prison's case, there were so few infractions that they decided to close an entire wing of solitary confinement because it just wasn't needed anymore. And so, as cyberpunk dystopian as this looks and feels, really seems like this is a great example of some of the amazing strengths of virtual reality. And I think while researching this, there was one quote that really stuck with me. When given scenes of people casually walking around the Eiffel Tower as part of the solitary VR program, an inmate said, quote, "You see tourists, regular people going to and from work, and that's when it hit me. I want to live life like that. I deserve it. I owe it to myself," end quote. Alright, but now let's catch up on everything that's been going on with Meta, because honestly, the entire company has just been acting really weird lately, and I think you'll see what I'm talking about. And I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but Meta has essentially erased the term virtual reality from everything, not just in their own marketing, but in internal documentation, in developer tools, and even retroactively in VR headset descriptions. If you're a VR developer, well, congrats, you've been rebranded as a mixed reality developer. In fact, in a recent survey, there's not even an option for a VR developer, and while this is technically just a naming convention, I do want to let this idea sink in for a moment. The leader of the VR industry, by far, has just name swapped the entire industry a decade into something that literally literally nobody uses. I mean, even Microsoft discontinued the term mixed reality years ago, but here we are. And this isn't just conjecture. This was recently confirmed by current Meta CTO Andrew Bosworth, which perfectly brings us to our next Meta topic, the pretty alarming internal memo that Bosworth sent to Meta Reality Labs employees recently, titled 2025, the Year of Greatness. The memo starts with this gem of a quote. "This year likely determines whether this entire effort will go down as the work of visionaries or a legendary misadventure," end quote. Basically, this whole memo is a pep talk to the Reality Labs team, saying Horizon Worlds needs to succeed, particularly on mobile, like mobile phones, not mobile VR, and that it'll be this year's efforts that decides whether this entire mixed reality industry was a legendary misadventure or not. Yikes. And so you can pause and read the memo if you'd like. Honestly, I got nothing but terrible vibes from it, but I wasn't the only one. At first, I thought maybe I was just a little crazy for thinking that the mixed reality rename was a bad idea, and that maybe putting all your eggs in the Horizon Worlds basket, Horizon being Meta's social metaverse platform, might also be a bad idea. It turns out I'm not all that crazy. John Carmack, the ex-Oculus CTO and co-founder of id Software, chimed in, also saying that this entire memo and mixed reality move is both a flawed strategic direction and an unfortunate terminology revolution that somebody had to have championed. And yeah, I think I know exactly who championed this. But okay, weird internal memos and renaming the entire industry is one thing, but not everything has been terrible at Meta. And to be fair, some of this actually kind of makes sense when you look at Meta's most recent quarterly revenue reports. In 2024, Reality Labs broke records, both good and bad. Quest 3, 3S, Ray-Ban smart glasses, and software sales hit an all-time high. But Reality Labs also posted record quarterly losses, burning through around $5 billion. Most of it sunk into augmented reality R&D. But here's the real kicker, and I think the spur point for all of this. Meta's biggest success last year, and reason for their record revenue, wasn't because of VR stuff. It was because of AI smart glasses. And when you put that next to VR hardware sales that came nowhere close to the Quest 2 sales, poor retention, Meta-backed VR studios shutting their doors, well, yeah, it kind of feels like they're flailing. And I hate to say it, but I think Meta's kind of lost the plot while chasing entirely unrealistic expectations given the current state of VR. Rather than focusing on the technology, acknowledging its current strengths and weaknesses, and capitalizing on the few places where people do actually use VR every day, they're buckling down on Horizon Worlds and weird terminology on imaginary people for imaginary use cases. And I don't know, man, it's just weird. And I also find this to be a bit hilarious. Meta has been bankrolling like a dozen big AAA-ish VR games for release on Quest over the past few years, from Assassin's Creed to Medal of Honor to Alien to Metro to even a Batman Arkham game. And I can imagine Meta probably expected a giant explosion of VR users from all of these titles. But the reception to all of these games has really just been kind of okay. And I mean, none of these games are bad, but they're also not really that great either. Meanwhile, the thing that's actually been exploding VR usage has been with the child demographic with Gorilla Tag and Gorilla Tag clones, bringing in legitimately hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. No joke. And I can just imagine the absolute confusion of Meta's executives as they realize they don't really know their own platform as well as they think they do. This is where my worries come in. I have a feeling that Meta doesn't really want these games like Animal Company to be exceeding at all. In fact, the push for Horizon Worlds over the past year, including a $50 million Horizon Worlds fund, really just feels like a push to get people off of individual VR applications and onto a platform that Meta owns. With recent moves to make Horizon Worlds almost its own game engine, Meta wants the biggest VR games to be within their platform, not just within their store, but within Horizon. And I also have a feeling, given Bosworth's recent words, that Meta is going to do literally whatever it takes to hit critical mass of users within Horizon, even if it quite literally takes killing VR, even if it's just the name. But so much more happened in VR than just Meta getting a little confused. We've been talking about Deckard for, well, pretty much 4 years now, but it seems we're closer to release than ever. Gabe Follower, a known Valve leaker, claims that Valve's long-rumored upcoming standalone hybrid VR headset is actually launching this year, and we have a supposed price. Deckard will supposedly be launching at $1,200, which doesn't quite hit the Quest competitor price range that I was hoping for, but reportedly, even at $1,200, Valve will still be selling this headset at a loss. And according to Gabe Follower's leak, Deckard will be running SteamOS standalone, come bundled with some in-house games or demos that have already been finished, and of course feature controllers, codename Roy, that double as gamepads for flat-screen gaming. We've already talked about most of those details in the past. You can watch that video if you're interested, and I would still take all of this with a grain of salt, but between the Steam VR driver leaks, job listings, Valve's not-so-subtle hints, and the litany of leaks that we've gotten over time, Deckard is obviously on its way, and I have a feeling that the stars are almost aligned. But now we can talk about the big story. Palmer Luckey, aka the guy that literally created modern VR, is back. And if you don't know who this is, let me just give a quick crash course. Palmer is well known as the guy that basically revived modern-day virtual reality, initially creating VR headsets out of a trailer to eventually launch the Oculus Kickstarter. And long story short, Facebook, later Meta, acquired Oculus for $2 billion, and things were seemingly going pretty well until Facebook basically fired Palmer Luckey for very loosely supporting Trump during the 2016 election. Which, by the way, I find incredibly ironic in 2025, given Mark Zuckerberg, the guy who essentially bought Oculus, kicked out the founder for supporting Trump, and then subsequently killed the Oculus brand, is suddenly best friends with Trump, but I digress. After being blacklisted from the industry, Palmer went on to build Anduril, a billion-dollar defense company from scratch that now manufactures a wide variety of defense technologies from drones to counter missiles and more. But the big news is that Anduril just took over the $22 billion contract for the US Army's Integrated Visual Augmented System, or IVAS, which is basically the biggest military XR project in history. Previously spearheaded by Microsoft's HoloLens team, the project was supposedly close to being canned after difficulties with the HoloLens hardware. But with Anduril's involvement, the project has received an entire new life. Palmer laid out most of his plans in his blog, and honestly, it's pretty insane. This isn't just some fancy HoloLens with a heads-up display. He essentially wants to build a superpower device. Night vision, ultraviolet, thermal, AI-enhanced overlays, predictive combat intelligence, drone integration. It's what he calls a full-blown Technomancer heads-up display. One that I can imagine seamlessly integrates with Anduril's other offerings. And so, what was originally a pretty boring and honestly mid-US Army contract that wasn't going too well is turning out to be likely one of the most advanced and probably expensive XR devices ever developed. And so, yeah, Palmer Luckey is back. Maybe not in consumer technology, and maybe not in a way that everyone would agree with, but in a world where this contract will be fulfilled by somebody at some point, I'm personally excited to see where Palmer will take it, as designing head-mounted displays is literally this guy's life's work. And in his blog, he finishes out his personal announcement with a chilling quote: "Whatever you are imagining, however crazy you imagine I am, multiply it by 10 and then do it again. I am back, and I am only getting started." And so, I think that's a pretty good place to wrap up. There's been a ton of doom and gloom within the VR industry in a lot of ways the past few weeks and kind of this whole year, and I don't really blame anybody for it. Given everything I just talked about with Meta, which I really tried not to sound super negative about, but it's just almost surreal the way things are going. And also, the past couple of years have just been pretty tough. Dozens of studios have closed, tens of thousands of people have been laid off, a lot of hyped releases fell really flat, and again, you got Meta making really weird decisions that do everything but inspire confidence in the VR industry. And of course, this isn't just VR, this is gaming as a whole, but I'm gonna say this today, and it's gonna be the same thing I say next year, and it's gonna be the same thing I say in 10 years. This technology isn't going anywhere. It's simply far too compelling. That being said, there are going to be ups and downs, as there are with anything. And I honestly don't even think the VR industry has hit its rock bottom yet. Things might actually get worse before they get better. If you think people say VR is dead now, just wait. And I know for the people that have been here this entire time, it's really easy to look at VR today with a retrospective lens. Think about how much better things could have been if something arbitrary happened differently. And it's also really easy to look at VR today and notice all the various ways that VR kind of sucks. But I think that's missing the bigger picture. And every industry that's ever changed the world has gone through moments like this, where expectations don't meet reality, where progress feels frustratingly slow, and where the wrong people seem to be making all of the decisions. But if there's one thing I've learned covering this space for as long as I have, it's that VR will always find a way forward, not because of billion-dollar corporations, but because of the people who actually care, the developers, the creators, the artists, the engineers, the dreamers. Those are the people that actually make up VR. So yeah, things might get a bit worse before they get better, but they're on the way. And that original spark that inspired me to even get into VR, it's still there, and it's still there for you too if you know where to look. And I think that's exactly where I come in. Now, while I can't promise a Tuesday Newsday every week, I don't think you'd want that anyways, I think you'll start seeing a few more videos from me. But until next time, thank you so much to my Patreon supporters. You guys make videos like this possible. If you want to join a great VR community, then check out my Discord server, links below. And of course, don't forget to like this video if you loved it, subscribe if you want more of this, and hit that freaking bell if you just can't live without it. Much love, Thrill out.